In an era where the fusion of senses and space redefines our physical engagements, the crafting of experiences that bewitch and bind has never been more pivotal. Welcome back to the Phygital Lab, the platform where the sort of digital and the tangible intertwine, where we aim to help discover tomorrow's reality in commerce that seems to be forever changing at this time. This episode that we're calling Enchanting Realities, Sculpting the Next Wave of Physical Engagement, welcomes Grant Dudson. We consider Grant a virtuoso of experiential design, whose approach transforms ordinary spaces into realms of wonder. And having carved the niche in creating immersive narratives for the elite, he now pioneers the use of AI in breathing life into these narratives, challenging our perceptions and elevating the experiential almost to an art form. From his sort of whimsical beginnings to the launch of his new venture, Studio Grant Harvey, Grant's journey is a testament to the power of imagination melded with innovation. And I'm looking forward to today where he's going to share his insights on pushing the boundaries of experiential design and what it actually means to truly engage in this sort of digitally intertwined era. So, Grant, it's a privilege to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining. And before we dive in and staying in true fashion and being honest with our last episode, could you briefly share with us what was the last book or publication that you read, why you chose it, and sort of like the impact it left?
So I used to read a lot of like fiction stuff when I was young. I'm also a very visual person. To be honest with you, I wasn't particularly great with reading words and all of that. So I always needed books actually with pictures when I was young. But in the last, few years, I'm always kind of trying to learn more about myself through the eyes of successful people. So Stephen Bartlett, I think, is doing some great stuff at the moment in his Diary of a CEO. I think this the first book came out, and I read that towards the end of last year. And the way that he also breaks everything down, the principles that are digestible and applicable to our everyday life in order to better ourselves and our approach to being a success story and realizing our potential. So that was the last book I read. And I also love actual physical books because, and maybe I'm just too old school like this, but I like the tactility of it. I like to kind of underline words and take phrases and fold pages and all of that. Like, I just feel like there's a deeper sense of connection with it.
I agree. I agree. I haven't read the Diary of a CEO, but I am a big fan of Mr. Bartlett, and I've been following him online and many of his interviews that he's staged. I think it's a totally different modern approach on a different level of personal exposure. How do these people that are monumentally successful, from kind of like recording artists all the way down to evangelists that generally stay out the spotlight.
Yeah.
And I love his sort of soft investigative process that he takes. But I completely agree. I think that there's something nostalgic and really charming about having a physical book. And I am a big fan of going onto Amazon and sort of ordering 3 or 4 books at a time and then taking my time to go through them. And 2, highlighting, annotating, folding pages. I don't think you can beat it. I think the idea of walking the earth with a Kindle or some kind of iPad, it doesn't come close to actually taking a book on an aeroplane or taking a book on a train. And
right.
I don't know, greater sense of attachment. Completely agree.
And to be honest with you, there is a little bit of a kind of connection with what we're talking about today, because it's more experiential, right? It's that kind of physicality, I think, that we very much are attuned to. I think that's something that humans need. I really do. I mean, digital is obviously at the forefront of what we do this day and age, and that's fine. And I think it's there to be embraced, but I think it needs to be a hybrid of the two. I think that's key.
Completely agree. And thank you so much for creating a bridge into the first sort of topic that I wanted to discuss with you. That's great. You have a highly creative upbringing, and you're still involved in musical creation and looking at some of the executions and some of the designs that you come up with throughout your career. It's very, very clear that you have a great connection to the creative aspect of what you're doing. And I want to know more about your approach. So when we think about sort of like the art of multisensory experiential design, which we've just sort of talked about when it comes to the physicality of actually holding a book, Could you share your approach to sort of weaving together these sort of various sensory elements, and how you prioritize which senses to engage in a particular experiential design? So how does that come together from sort of a cohesive and immersive experience perspective for you?
I think for me, it also really depends on the brief. I think I'm one of these people where, I'll have a brief come in and I'll try and see it through the lens of sensory engagement. So I will go, right, what does this look like in terms of a solution through visual? What would it smell like? How would it feel? And how can you bring all of those different elements to solving the riddle? I apply that kind of holistic approach, if you will, to bringing something to life. I think it all needs to sit within an overarching kind of creative concept. But the template or the framework that I plug into is very much a sensory one. And I think that from my point of view, I mean, even when I was creating a multi-sensory ritual for Johnny Walker Blue Label, that's a whiskey, right? There was a lot of people, especially in my time in the drinks industry, about 5 years now, who have said to me, oh, you're into whiskey and you work with Johnny Walker and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, I don't like whiskey. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, do you know why you don't like it? And they're like, yeah, I had a bad experience when I was 18 with Jack Daniels or whatever it was. And yeah, I've never tried it since. Terrible hangover. And, to be honest with you, there was a part of me when I was young as well that was quite like that. But kind of diving into that world and understanding the heritage, and then also kind of exploring different whiskies and, seeing how these different flavor profiles are kind of brought into maturation over years and years and years. That process also adds to the kind of mystique and the enchantment of what those products bring. And of course, if you don't like the taste, then that's one thing. But the other side of it is that, a lot of whiskies also have completely different flavor profiles from one another. So one could be sweet, the other one could be spicy. You've got smoky if it's Talisker, Speyside, all of that. And my thing is, well, already you've got all of these different flavor components that just adds a dynamic kind of complexity to that world that most people actually don't know exists. And then the other side of that is, well, actually, if we're thinking about whiskey and we're thinking about taste, how can you also bring about that enchantment and that narrative through the senses? So for Blue Label, we ended up working with an Italian perfumer who worked very closely with Emma Walker, the master blender of Johnny Walker, to create a perfume that was designed to pull out the different flavor notes and celebrate different flavor notes of the Johnny Walker Blue Label. So if you tried it, but then you were also very much immersed in this scent, it would heighten the flavor experience, and it would also heighten your connection to the whiskey. And then we had this whole 3D audioscape that I created, because the big narrative there was this rolling wave of flavor. It was how Jim Beveridge, the preceding master blender, described the Blue Label flavor experience. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. It's quite poetic. It's beautiful. How do you bring that to life through the senses? So the rolling wave of flavor, it's very indicative of something that you can imagine, a rolling wave. What does that sound like if you close your eyes? What does that feel like if you dive in? It's all of that kind of level in invigoration and complete freedom and emancipation that comes with this rolling wave of flavor. So there's something really kind of gorgeous about the poetry of that then can be interpreted through a 3D audioscape, which is what we created, through a perfume, through a flip book. So we animated, we're talking about tactility versus digital. I created a whole flip book, so it animates as you flip through. And we sprayed the end. So, when you're in the airport and you're doing this and you get that kind of waft. And I was like, it's the same principle. Like, as you kind of flip through, you get that draft. But I was like, why don't we create a scented draft almost, right? And so it's kind of playing with all of these different functionalities, but giving them almost a purpose and a meaning. And then the other side of it was, well, there's a rarity story. And I said, well, what is it? And they said, well, 1 in 10,000 casks make the grade. It's that rare. It's like, wow. But they're like, we don't really know how to visualize it. We don't really know how to tell that story that, in a way that kind of embeds into one's imagination and memory. So I said, let's start off by going, what does 1 in 10,000 look like? Like, what does it actually look like? And, if you've got like 10,000 balls in a room, okay, the balls could be big, they could be small, but what does it actually physically look like? And then I started going, well, how many dots could you get on a tiny piece of paper? What does 10,000 dots look like? Would it fill an A4? Would it go beyond? So we started playing around with that, and then we got it down to quite a nice, sizable kind of card shape, but something like that. So it was quite interesting because it was like, actually, this is something we could play with, and it's a really lovely visual cue to kind of telling that story. So I ended up with 10,000 gold embossed dots and a really lovely weighted card that was shaped in the parallelogram of Johnny Walker, which is one of their kind of key brand assets. And one of those dots was blue. And the whole part of this ritual was, you got these cards and everyone was like, oh, I wonder what that is. What does it do? What's the functionality? But you've obviously got a host as well to kind of narrate and guide people through the experience. But the question put to everybody was, how many dots do you think are on the card? So you got everything from, and it was crazy. Some people were like 100,000. I was like, wow, really? And someone else was like 2,000. But you're going from 100,000 to 2,000. But it's also interesting to see how different minds interpret something like that, right? 2,000 to 100,000. That's like, it just shows kind of almost what goes on in their head to process something like this. So the thing is as soon as you ask that question, everyone's engaged because they're all trying to figure it out. And then you obviously divulge the answer. You talk to them about it being 1 in 10,000. Then you go, right, there's a blue dot. Can you find it? And everyone's got like a slightly different position for that blue dot. And they're trying to, oh, yeah, okay, no, mine's here. So there's a level of gamification that you can also bring into that. But that plays to tactility. It plays to gamification. It plays to almost kind of giving people a bit of a say in the presentation. It's all well and good as standing up and, giving a PowerPoint. Everything should be a dialogue of sorts. I think that's really important. That's why I think personalization is going to be a big win for a lot of brands moving forward. And I think we'll see a lot more of that in the art world as well, which I think also will underpin a lot of brand experiences. And it's definitely the route that I take with a lot of the different projects that I have.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because I have to say I haven't seen that campaign, but just through your explanation, I'm already starting to visualize it, and this gives me a real insight into how you work. And listening to you and the fact that you pick up elements from process, where you talk about that wave, where you talk about creation and then heritage and legacy, and it's asking those questions. What does that look like? So how would that feel? So when I dive into that, how would I feel? And this just tells me that it's highly sensual, kind of this process that you're using. Everything is placed almost through a sensorial lens. And then after that, it's then when you become potentially more tactical or tactile. And when you talk about this sort of, what does 10,000 dots look like? Or what does 1 in 10,000 dots look like? And then getting the brain, a system 2, to start thinking about it and finding it and identifying it. And they still don't actually know why those dots are there. And this is, I think it's awesome. Maybe let's use that example actually, because that's leading on to the next element. Because I know that you're starting to play with AI now, and perhaps you've been playing, behind the curtain for quite some time. But let's use that Johnny Walker campaign as an example. When we talk about AI's role in kind of enhancing creative expression, what ways does sort of AI influence or transform your creative process, especially when it comes to sort of ideation, execution? If you can provide an even better example, then go for it. But maybe if you were to use that, and if you were to re-look at that, what sort of role could it have played?
Well, AI in arriving at the kind of 1 in 10,000.
Well, not necessarily that specific element, but just the whole campaign itself, the experiential side of it.
Look, I can, let me start by kind of telling you how I think as a creative as well, because there are many different types of creatives. And there are a lot of creatives out there that are very good at, say, graphic design, right? So they're really good structurally. They understand geometry. They understand how to kind of reflect the sentiment of a brand through some sort of visual identity. I have always been a more kind of conceptual creative. I've always been like big blue sky thinking, always. And that's always been a bit of a blessing and a curse for me, because most people don't get it. They're like, whoa, just rein it in, right? I've kind of ended up in an industry where that is absolutely embraced. And then I'm also surrounded by people who can kind of help take that crazy idea and bring it down a little bit in order to make it plausible for the budget, say, that we're working to. Now, going back to your question about AI, there's been many, 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 many years where creatives like myself have been dreaming up a new invention, a new entertainment format, whatever that might be. It needs to be visualized in order for us to articulate what that is. If I'm going to sell something into someone, it's all well and good me standing in front of them and, you know, kind of telling the story and getting them excited and moving my hands. But not everybody has the imagination or the capability or the cognitive capacity to fill in the blanks, to be able to kind of have some really beautiful rendered imagery to fortify what it is that you're trying to sell in is really, really important. Now, I've done this for many, many years. Obviously, as brands come to me and they say, what do we do here to solve this kind of brief? I'll have a whole team of visual artists, production designers, and all of that will help me visualize my idea, get it to a place where it works within the budget and kind of ticks all of the boxes, honors the brand values, all of that. But the great thing about AI is that AI kind of has become a kind of creative collaborator. And so all creatives, I don't care who you are, and some creatives will be like, well, I don't need inspiration. But most creatives are very much looking for inspiration. What I'm very good at is taking this and taking that and creating something brand new. And looking at the world as almost a kind of palette of inspiration where I can pull from so many different things and so many different, you know, it's like the flip book, for example, right? Like at first I was kind of, do we need a piece of paper to spray the perfume on? So we do that. Because I was just thinking about how people receive it in the airport. But I'm like, that's just a bit boring. And it's not, it's just, we need something more theatrical. And I was like, oh, the flip book's really interesting because you can tell the story whilst also creating the same mechanic. And you receive it in the same way, but it's also through a bit of an unexpected theatrical lens. So my whole notion with AI is I use it to be able to articulate some of these grand visions that I've always had and always been talking about, but don't have either the resource or the finance or the time to build it, right? Whereas now I can do all of that for a fraction of time, money, resource. It drives me mad when people do say, oh, yeah, but this is not your work because it's AI. And it's like, do you know how it works for a start? And do you know what the process looks like? Like, irrespective of whether it's pulling from lots of different things that exist on the internet and all the rest of it, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, as a creative, that's what I do anyway. I'll go, oh, that's really cool. Look at that campaign. But if they did this and they did that, and I slam 5 ideas together, I create something brand new. And that's the power of creativity. And that's also what creatives do. And so all AI is doing that maybe from 1,000 different references to try and honor what your North Star looks like, having a vision and trying to get to that place. And it doesn't get it right on maybe 90% of the time. Like, you have to go through a process. It's back and forth, take words out. Right. Okay. So let's go into Photoshop and build a basic version of what we're trying to create and input that back into AI and then add a prompt so you can get closer to where you're trying to get to. I'm working on a daytime drone show at the moment, right? Just to give you an example. Hasn't been done yet. Talking to Sky Magic, and I want to do it for the first time. I want to do the biggest daytime drone show. Not only will it be the first, but it'll be something like 1,000 or 2,000 or something along those lines. Everyone's always gone, you can't do a daytime drone show. It doesn't make sense. They only work at night because of the lights. And it's like, yeah, but all you're thinking about are the lights. What if you did something a bit different? Why do you attach a tendril of voil or whatever it was to those drones, and suddenly you're using those drones in a different way to anything that's been thought about before? Now, I had this idea for about a year, and I sketched it out, and I'm like, I talked to a bunch of visual artists. They're like, Grant, I'm just too busy. I'm like, okay. They're like, unless you want to pay me $1,000 a day to kind of articulate this. I'm like, well, I don't, not really, not yet. I need the money first, and I need to visualize it before I can get the funding. So my whole point was, you know what? I'm going to use AI to create this, what a daytime drone show might look like. And I was going back and forth for ages trying to nail this. And I was just getting awful imagery. It just really wasn't, it was like a drone, like in the sky wrapped in a sheet, you know, like, and it was, or it had like a clothesline that it was attached to it. And and sometimes the offshoots are really interesting. But that's what I'm saying. To use AI properly, have a bit of a North Star. What is it that you're trying to get to? And sometimes you have those kind of like, nuances, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. And that's great. And that's fine. And that's what happens when you use Pinterest as inspiration as well. It's the same thing. But the way that I ended up nailing this one was to actually go into Photoshop, and I built a very basic version of what this drone show would look like. Very basic, right? So I'd take I cut out tendrils, I'd put them in the sky, it would be like a completely blank green field with a blue sky backdrop. And because I was also typing blue sky backdrop in AI, and it would just keep giving me skies with lots of clouds, and it just wasn't there. And this is what drives me mad with people. They're like, oh, this is AI, so it's not your work. And I'm like, guys, please, you don't understand it. This is my concept. The IP is part of the concept. So if the concept is mine, then ultimately whatever it is that I do in order to get to visualizing what that concept is, the image itself, okay, no one owns it. Fine, I don't really care about that. But the concept itself is mine. And so you start with a concept, and you're using AI to visualize that. And in the end, I got to a really good place. And that's how I ended up actually kind of talking to Sky Magic, because they were like, this is really amazing. And then I had the biggest conglomerate in India going, we want to fund it. Right. And I posted that on social media, and I used AI to get there. And I also supported that with my own experimentation, which definitely validated it, where I have my drone, only one. But I did it with a toilet paper at first, and I was like, what? But actually, it was really interesting, because you just got to experiment. That's the way it works. Not everything is polished. And I sent up like a bog roll. Off it went. Poof. It's just moving, this beautiful movement. It was gorgeous. And you put some orchestral music to that, and you times it by 1,000. I mean, why? Andrex could bloody give me the money if they wanted to. Like, it's just... Right. And so I put those images together and kind of create a palette of different imagery, including AI, to sell the idea. So that's where AI is really, really smart and very beneficial. And it's going to be an inextricable part of the creative process.
I'm in complete agreement. I use it as part of our creative process as well in the lab. And I think it's, your logic is irrefutable, because when you think about the creative process, every individual or every creative has their own process, and going to different resources for visual inspiration, material inspiration, sound inspiration. That's a lot of time to bring all of that, to go there and find this and identify that. And you're not there yet. You're at the very, very early stages of conceiving something. And you're right. It just streamlines that process for you. And I completely agree that when someone comes along and saying, well, that's not your idea, that's something else. No, of course it's bloody not. Because it's everything. It wouldn't exist if it wasn't for your suggestion, if it wasn't for your conception. So I think I'm in complete agreement, and I look forward to seing this drone show during the day. I think it's genius. But this is this whole lateral thinking that I admire about you so much, that you're taking something that everyone considers to be fit for purpose, doing something else, light shows, and you're now using the drone as a vehicle for some other form of creative expression. And you're indeed right, natural movement accompanied by sound and something else, and by people. When you then slap the energy of the people in that environment as well, you created something completely unique.
100%.
I think it's brilliant. I look forward to seeing it. So this is kind of, we talked about the softer side of almost storytelling and building narrative and understanding where the sensory elements come in, and it examined your creative process and how AI is actually almost acting like a catalyst for you, and helping you get to places quicker, or maybe not quicker, just giving you more. When it comes to looking at digital artistry, because I know you've done quite a lot with digital artistry within sort of physical spaces, how do you ensure that it doesn't overpower and that it complements the situation? And if you could explain a bit of your perspective on that and your experience, and what sort of challenges have you faced to avoid that overpowering?
It's a great question, and there are many facets to the answer, to be honest, because I started off with projection mapping, right? So projection mapping is obviously, that's still very much digital. It's digital content, but the format there is that you're mapping the geometry, the architectural detail of a building, and then you are changing the construct, the facade, and the vista of that building through the manipulation of content. You know, we did the very first project I worked on as a creative was the Ralph Lauren 4D experience, and that was by Drive Productions. Imogen Hammond was the creative director, and Ben Fender, who was a bit of a visionary CEO, was really driving the forefront of where projection mapping was going. And it was right at the beginning of where that whole new way of entertainment could take audiences and brands. And even to this day, the Ralph Lauren 4D experience is pretty much one of the most incredible examples of projection mapping, you know, anyone's ever seen. And so you go to the point where you're questioning how to make sure that the content isn't overdone or, you know, is jarring. I think it needs to be complementary to a couple of things. With projection mapping, it needs to be complementary to the building and obviously the message you're trying to tell. The Ralph Lauren 4D experience, Drive Productions literally had a green screen and had polo horses in front of it, like, you know, kind of galloping towards the camera. You know, they did some incredible stuff on that. I'm not responsible for it, but I was in awe, and that's how I kind of cut my teeth in the industry, is seeing those types of activations and that level of kind of digital content being created and produced. Now, from projection mapping all the way through to kind of more immersive art installations and kind of brand experience led stuff, I think for me, you can look out there at the likes of Rafiq Anadol, and he does some incredible stuff with his swirls and all of those kind of, you know, gorgeous, natural, organic expressions. Very colorful, very dynamic, but never overbearing, never too much. Even in small spaces, it's just beautiful. And we did something very similar for Johnny Walker's Blue Label experience, where you were literally in the middle of a room, you were wrapped in 360 degrees of this rolling wave of flavor again, but we articulated it visually. So it was all about the movement. And, you know, actually when we first, and this is an interesting case study really, because when we first sat in that room, we built the room first to test it out. Because we were like, how far are the screens from where everyone sat? Are they too close? To your point, all of this blue swirly stuff moving around them, will they feel sick? Will they start to feel a bit nauseous? And actually, when we first did the test, it was moving too quickly, and it was making people feel sick. And everyone felt like the room was moving, you know, and that's before you drink whiskey. So, you know, from that perspective, it wasn't quite working. So everyone was a bit like, oh my God, how do we fix this? And in the end, what we did is we didn't create a full 360 kind of, well, it was 360, but we didn't have a screen that was 360. It was like something, it was almost like there was a chunk of it that was mirrored, that kind of almost reflected back the content to kind of make it go the other way. And doing that stopped the disorientation. And we slowed the content down so it's more tranquil. And then it just acted as just a beautiful vista that wrapped everybody in order to really celebrate the narrative of what that rolling wave of flavor was portraying. And so in that case, it was about movement. It was about the physical delivery of the content. I think if content's too close to you, sometimes that can be an issue as well. If you think about Rafiq Anadol's work, it's just organic, it's beautiful, it's natural. I think any content that takes on the form, even if it's abstract, but it takes on this sinuous, kind of gorgeous, tranquil notion, and it has depth and texture, there's always going to be something just absolutely mesmeric about that. I think it's when content is so flashy lights and you know, it hasn't really been thought about necessarily as the primary point of entertainment. Maybe it could be to support a music concert or something along those lines. And then sometimes, because the music is the priority, you can feel almost a little bit like the visuals can be jarring, because it's a secondary consideration. So I think, yeah, there's lots of different ways to answer that question. I think for me, you know, I think it's always about context of what you're trying to say with that visual content, and how it's presented. The presentation of it's really important. But I think it should always be complementary to the space and the experience that you're trying to provide.
That leads me to this other area, which is all about emotional engagement. So that avoiding overbearing situations where we've got too much digital, and that's a really good example, actually. And it's more exposure into that process where you built that room for the Johnny Walker campaign. You wanted to get that wave movement rolling, but you iterated, you tested it to see, because it was making people feel sick.
Yeah.
And now you're slowing things down. I think this is absolutely part of it. There's the conceptual imagination where you know what you want things to look at, but then you go into the more testing and understanding. Okay, but how does it actually need to be applied? And that's some really good insight into that area of your process. When it comes to sort of strategy development for the physical space, and where you're trying to forge and create those deeper, more emotional connections between the sort of consumer and the brand, and in that framework of experiential design, how does, I mean, obviously everything you do is trying to create an emotional response, is trying to relocate people, whether it's subliminal or virtual, whatever it might be. What strategies do you employ to sort of to create an emotional connection between the consumer and the brand when it comes to experience design? What's your sort of go-to from that angle?
I think from my point of view, that's why I'm so eager to champion immersive experiences, because the amount of activations I've seen where they go, come and look at this really cool thing that we're doing, and it's just a painting or a screen on the wall, or, you know, a bunch of touch points in a very crowded room with lots of distractions. You're never really going to engage anyone on an emotional level when you do that, right? I mean, we travel all over the world to different locations because we want to be fully immersed in an environment that's completely unfamiliar to us, but enchants us. And if, you know, we've been doing that for as long as we've known humanity, you know, to explore, to go to new places, to walk in the woods, to be surrounded, like walking in the woods is an immersive art installation. You've got all of those trees around you. You're completely immersed in a place that is couldn't be further from, you know, walking down Oxford Street. You know, it's that these installations, these natural installations, have almost been part of our life, and, you know, since day dot, but we've never really regarded them as installations because they're natural. But we need to also take into consideration how these different environments make us feel. And that's what it's all about. It's going, how do you make someone feel something? How do you connect them with the brand on a level of intense feeling, on a visceral level? And taking those cues for everything I've just said, walking in a forest, up in the mountains, through a cave, swimming and snorkeling, that's immersive. It's fully immersive, 4 walls, ceiling, floor. And that's what you have to do, is you need to transport people and the senses to a different location entirely without distraction. And the distraction's an important thing as well. It should be seamless, because as soon as you have a distraction, they're not there. If we're in Bali and suddenly there's a window into, you know, Oxford Street, London, you're going to be confused. It's a bit like, oh, it's an illusion. We're not really here. You need to create something where they feel like they are there. And if that's otherworldly, if that's something like Meow Wolf, or if that's something that, you know, kind of Rafik Anadol's done, or if it's the Obliteration Room by Yayoi Kusama, or Infinity Room, or stuff that Team Lab do, like, you'll notice the reason all of these artists are so successful is because they create transportative transformational, immersive experiences without any sort of distraction. You literally walk into a world. And when I talk about designing worlds, that's what I mean. You know, you need to create a world that is so believable, you then subscribe to this new place. And when you subscribe to a new place, you buy into a new narrative, and you buy into a new narrative, you almost become the protagonist within this experience. You feel like you're the main character. And that's very empowering, right? To be able to go hiking and traveling around the world. There's something really powerful about that. Something that conquers depression and conquers self-doubt. Like, you're free. There's a liberating feeling. And you can create that through these really beautiful brand worlds and brand spaces. And you transport people through that lens. And so that's kind of how I think about designing experiences for brands if we're trying to connect with the audience on an emotion level. And to be honest with you, when we come back to a brief, that will always be my underpinning of the idea. It needs to connect to everyone on a visceral level. And if it doesn't, then you're not really going to see the success or the return on investment that you are after. So immersive experience is always a very key part of how you engage people emotionally. And then once you're in this world, what does that look like? Is this a world that is flat? Is it a world that is familiar? You know, there's something that hills does to us. Like what the hill, like, you know, if you go and, like, I'm from North Lincolnshire, it's very flat land. Arguably that's synonymous with boring. And why is it boring? Because innately we're looking at it going, I already know what all of this has to offer. I'm stood here surveying all of it, and I can see it. So there's no point me walking over there because it's going to look exactly the same as it looks here. But if you go somewhere where there's lots of hills, there's just that natural human curiosity to kind of go, what's over that hill? And when I get over that hill, oh, there's another one. And suddenly and it's that sense of invigorative exploration that drives this sense of wonder and empowerment and zest for life. That's the reaction and the response that you want to get. So when possible, I always bring in split level spaces, right? Even if it's in a smaller space, like, how can we create split level? Can you walk up some steps and then you come down the other side? Is there a bridge we can throw in? You know, how do we create these different kind of areas? So for Macallan last October in 2023, we created a whole installation where it was for the Macallan Harmony, which was a new collection of the Macallan brand. And they wanted a whole launch and it needed to be experiential. And I said, look, because this whole new variant of Macallan had a very summer vibe. So I'm like, let's take a slice of Scotland, Speyside, which is pretty much where the Macallan estate is located. I'm like, what would it feel like to drink this? And there's also kind of part of their campaign as well. Up on the hills somewhere in the Highlands, during sunset, with the birds and the bees, and that kind of beautiful natural environment, a babbling brook in the distance. You sit on a boulder. The love that I have for nature in that world is that it's not dictatorial. The universe never designed everything and went, you need to use it like this. Whereas as designers, we're very much that way in the way that we approach design. We're like, right, that's a seat and you need to sit in it like this. Whereas what I love to do is go, right, let's create a bit of autonomy and allow people to choose how they interact with it. And that's what you do in nature. If we went like backpacking, we'll go, oh, shall we perch on that rock there? That looks like a cool place for us to have a sandwich, right? Or a little break. So how can you create spaces that allow people to explore and find a little place in that space that speaks to them? I'm not telling them to sit there. If they want to sit there, let them sit there. And then they're engaging with that space on a personal level. And that's very powerful because then suddenly they have buy-in to your brand. They have buy-in to your world. And again, they're playing the protagonist. They're not playing the audience. They're not listening to you tell them how to interact. They're interacting with it through your template and your lens, but they're doing it on their terms. And that's the power. It's like learning. People want to learn about your brand through learning about themselves, right? That's really important for brands to start to try and champion in the experiences that they put on. So that's kind of how I see the connection to that emotional part of who we are as humans. It's creating these worlds and taking a steer from nature and pretty much everything that's around us, but we've forgotten about what it is that's already been given to us. You know, what makes us happy, hiking, swimming in like beautiful lagoons. And, you know, we are creatures of exploration. We are here, whether you're spiritual or whether you're religious, it doesn't matter. We have a human experience, all of us. Now, what's beyond, what was before, will we ever know, will we not? Doesn't matter. We're here to experience. The only thing we'll ever take to the grave will be the memories and the experiences that we've had. We won't take our Ferrari. But why do people want a Ferrari? They don't want to take it beyond, but they want to have the experience of driving that Ferrari because it makes them feel something. So we're in the game of making people feel something. And if we can do that with immersive worlds, then we're tapping into their emotional kind of connectivity and their emotional disposition. And if we can do that, then we're winning.
Yeah, I love that. You articulate these this almost highly interconnected observational process that you go through so well. I think you're absolutely right. These sort of installations that occur naturally in nature, too often do we just ignore them, and actually there's so much inspiration there. And I love that that's almost the foundational blueprint of what you're trying to do, is that feeling right there where you're eating that sandwich on the Yorkshire Dales and there's a random rock and it's not designed to sit on, but you sit on it anyway. And that moment right there where you're eating your sandwich, breathing the air, getting wind on your face, feeling the heat of that little bit of sun that's coming through, that's what's creating that moment. And it's those moments that you aim to create. And I love it. I think that this is why so many of these experiences that you've created are working so well, because you're attaching it to a real basic level of just how do we want people to feel. You're not in the business of aesthetic design. You're in the architecture of feeling, and that's a totally different thing. How is your do you think your background in sort of entertainment has influenced your approach to what you do?
It's about understanding people. I really think that that's something that has helped me over the years through the many things that I've done. And not even just entertainment. Also, I think just kind of being customer facing, right? You know, I've worked in bars. I've worked on a nightclub door as a host, you know, like you don't get to know human nature in any other profession as much as you do when you're on the door of a nightclub. I mean, you see every type of character you can possibly imagine in every type of state you can possibly imagine. And you've got to deal with those people sometimes in a very challenging situation and figure out how to navigate past that. And also, again, you need to make them feel as though they're in control, even though they're not. And also kind of work that to your favor. And there's a psychology in that I've never learned, but I've understood just through trial and error. And also just trying to be as empathetic as possible. And that's what entertainment is, isn't it? I mean, you know, if you're going to sing a song, there's lots of people that go, oh, I'm a singer and I've got this really cool song, and you listen to it and you go, oh, I'm not sure you should give up your day job. But there might be one person out there that goes, that's the best thing I've ever heard, and arguably there's success in that. And I think I was always that guy when I was young who would watch Top of the Pops, and I don't think I ever disliked. I mean, even Cotton Eye Joe was great. Like, I don't think I ever disliked a number one single. There was always a level of, oh, I understand why it's number one. And then when I kind of I kind of had to retrofit that into the way that I think. So it's like, if I'm always liking the number one hit, does that mean that I think in a certain way? It means I have a kind of commercial mind, right? So if my taste is very similar to the majority of people, because I like Top of the Pops and the top 10 is, I'm like, oh, they're great. Then does that mean when I come up with music and when I come up with something creative and I think that it's good because it makes me feel something in the same way that the songs at Top of the Pops make me feel something, that should also resonate with the masses as well. So it's like, it's kind of I've always thought about that from an analytical perspective. It's some people everyone has their way of enjoying life. Some people like your rock music or, your R&B, your hip hop, your grime, whatever it is. That speaks to them. And that's the beauty of genres. But there's something to be said for commercial understanding and how you can captivate people en masse. Like, it's not, I don't create experiences that are just going to resonate with one or two people. Of course, I've got to look at the audience, but I don't care if you give me millennials, Gen Zs, like whoever they are. Like, it doesn't matter what color your skin is, whether you're religious or not. I'll create experiences that will make you feel something on a human level. It's that simple. No one in the world, I mean, I'm sure there are a few, but there'll be very, very few, can slag off the majesty and the beauty of a sunset. Doesn't matter whether you like a bloody Ford Fiesta or a Lamborghini. You'll sit in front of a sunset, could be in Bali, could be wherever, and there's a moment there where you just go, that is beautiful. There's no storytelling. There's no, you've got to interpret this way. There's no rationale. It's a moment for yourself. And okay, maybe people interpret differently ever so slightly, but the narrative comes from you. It's self-narrative. And that sunset is a sight to behold. It's a thing of beauty. And there's something to be said for that as well. So sometimes when I'm creating something, I'm like, how can I create my version of a sunset? And if I nail that, it means everyone's going to appreciate it in one way or another. And that's kind of a bit of a North Star for me in a way, in terms of how I kind of think about. I see, if I'm wowed by the idea that pops into my head, because it's not my idea first, it's given to me by the ether, right? It comes to me. There's a moment when I go, I see my idea for the first time, and I go, wow. It's not like I've always had the idea and I'm wedded to it. Ideas pop into your head. They're given to us. So if I'm wowed by the idea that comes into my head and I can see it and I can visualize it, I'm like, oh my God, if I'm wowed, I know other people will be wowed. And then it's my job to take that and give it to the people.
Yeah, you're sort of this role of disseminating your own ideas, and then it's the logical approach that you're taking from that. You love the top 10 on Top of the Pops. That means you're familiar to the majority, but it also means you have a commercial mind. Then you've got this creative capability. So when it comes to actually design, and you almost it almost feels like the way you talk that you feel there's a responsibility to share these ideas and therefore these experiences with others. From your experience, you've had a lot of success with creating either sort of like transient experiences or something that's more permanent. When it comes to, because everyone almost do they, but most want to understand what are the key factors that create something that's viral from an experiential campaign. What do you think that is, if there is such a thing? What is it that contributes to creating virality when it comes to experiential campaign? Or is it an accident? Is it an accident?
It's a tricky thing. I think there are many ways to go viral. I mean, if I absolutely had the secret sauce, I'd be doing it every day, but I don't. But what I'm very good at is knowing what people like. There's also a lot of these viral videos, it's through consistency. So they will post something of pretty high value. There's all these really amazing, comedians or content creators out there that have posted maybe about 300 times before one goes viral. And then one goes viral, and everyone then goes to their account, and then they look at everything else that they've done, and suddenly a shitload more go viral because they're like, wow, this dude does some really great stuff. And I didn't know that he did this a year ago, right? Because it didn't go viral, but it doesn't mean that it's not viral worthy. And I think there's something, even with me, you know, I've decided on LinkedIn to post pretty much every day, or at least, you know, 5 days a week. Did that for 2.5 years. I've gone from, you know, 2,000 followers to about 85,000 now. And it's steady, right? It's just putting the hours in, or I mean, not necessarily even hours, but just putting the time in and being consistent with it, and thinking about the quality of what you're trying to create. What's the provocation? Provocation is an important word. How do you provoke? And it doesn't necessarily have to be provocative in the sense where people get pissed off. That's not particularly a good idea. But you can provoke an uncomfortable conversation that ends up actually being something really valuable for everyone. So I always do that with all kinds of posts of mine, you know, like, why are car dealerships so damn dull? Right? And then I'll create like a cool Porsche dealership with colors and all the rest of it. And then I get lots of people going, you know, this will never work, and this, you know, is terrible, and it's too colorful, and it's taking emphasis off the cars. And when you go to a dealership, you just want to look at the cars. And I'm like, no, you don't, guys. That's absolute nonsense. I said, you know, at the end of the day, you can look at the cars anyway, but let's walk through a really cool environment. He's saying you can't drive your car into a field of green, or, you know, you can't drive your car into a sunset where it's going to end up being turned orange. You know, like, I'm not saying you can't have like spotlights on the cars, but make the space that they're in a bit more dynamic. Like, make it a place where people go, wow, have you've been to the Porsche dealership? It's amazing. And then what people start to do is they look at the brand differently as well. It's not just about the car. They subscribe to more of what Porsche is as a brand and an ethos. It's more powerful than believing in a product. If you get behind the brand, you'll invest in the products just by default. And then the CMO, I tagged the CMO of Porsche in this particular post, and he responded, and actually complimentary, and said, you know, this is really good and this is really interesting. And they created something called Art of Dreams. And that was the whole commissioning of lots of different artists around the world. And to basically create these really cool installations to give people a sense of what Porsche's soul looks like, right? There's humanity in brands articulating what their soul looks like, right? Where brands become more human. Because brands in general are not. They care about making money. When it comes to customer service, they're horrific. We're trying to get hold of people. We're being made to wait for hours sometimes, and then they just hang up. Like, you know, we're being subscribed into stuff left, right, and center. You know, like people that I know, older people as well, where they'll have like 20 subscriptions, and they go through their bank statements and they have no idea what half of them are. Everything now is like, you can't buy something once, you have to subscribe. I'll subscribe, but then you can cancel it, you know, in a month if you want. But then we're very busy. Everyone's so damn busy trying to make their life better, and we're trying to work things out or get a job or a pay rise or whatever, and we forget half of this stuff. But then the brands go, well, that's your fault. You know, you're accountable. You need to. But I'm like, no, actually, you're accountable. If I've got a mate of mine who's paying me, I don't know, £2,000 a month to come over and wash his car, right? And suddenly he sells his car, but he's still paying me £2,000 a month, and I'm not washing anything. I'm going to go, mate, do you, like, I'm loving the money, but, you know, I'm feeling like you can keep paying me if you want, but I'm checking in now. I'm just checking in to see if you want to stop this, or whether you're going to buy another car, like, and that is what, like, and brands could do this, like companies could do that. They could use AI to do this, and it's just checking in on people, right? And that is and I know I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but I feel like going back to kind of, you know, brand experience and all of that kind of stuff, I think it's the same thing. It's like, How do you represent the soul of your brand through experience? And that is when you connect people in a way that is meaningful. There's power in art-led design. And brands need to champion that a lot more. And, you know, Porsche now, if you look at all of there's a lot of dealerships now that are really colorful, really vibrant, really dynamic, right? And then I even use those references now for people that are moaning, going, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. But going back to your original question, virality can come from all of that, right? It's just having an opinion, trying to create quality content, but doing it consistently. You might get lucky and you might post one thing that absolutely flies. But to be honest with you, the big successes are the ones that have a backlog of really cool content that no one's seen before. Because as soon as someone engages with your account and they see all of that, it keeps them entertained. Then they'll share those and suddenly lots of other stuff go viral. And then there was one post, and this didn't go viral until maybe about 18 months into my kind of social media journey, which was me conceiving what a Maldivian island would look like if it was taken over by Tiffany & Co. And I articulated that with AI. And that ended up getting 38,000 likes over, well, just under 3 million views. It went bonkers. And I'm just like, wow, how do I do that again? And I haven't done it again. I haven't done it again, right? I have lots of posts that get maybe like, 4,000-5,000 likes, and I've had a few as well that have hit over 10,000. That's great. I'm super happy with it. It's amazing. But 38,000 likes. Tiffany hasn't even had a post, even with Beyonce on the front of it, that even gets a fraction of that. They'll hit maybe 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 likes. I've done something for Tiffany for nothing, and I've got 38,000 likes, right? They would have paid good money for that, like that kind of traction, right? And that's the other thing. I'm like, I reached out to all the Tiffany guys that are First Connections, the creative director at Tiffany. I'm like, hey, man, like, have you seen what I posted? Why don't you just do this now? Because it's proven people want to see it. You're dicking around with this experience or that experience, and you throw millions at this, that, and the other, and they get like a few thousand likes. I've got 38,000 likes on something that you have not even been involved in. I've done it off my own back, and I've proven to you what the appetite for doing something like this looks like. Why would you not pay attention to that? And why would you not leverage? Because half my brands say to me, how do we know that this is going to be a success, Grant? I'm like, well, we don't, do we? But because of my credentials and everything that I've done in the past, it's very likely that if I say something's going to work and you get behind it in terms of, pushing it out across social and all the rest of it, it's going to take off. And I haven't had one. I've tripped up and I've slipped along the way, but I've never had an unsuccessful project. It's always delivered beyond expectations, and I'm really proud of that. And every time they go, how do we know? And I'm like, we've just got to go for it, right? And have confidence and faith that we know what we're doing, and whatever we create, we know is going to get everyone else excited. And if we have the right PR behind it, it will go. But my point with people creating really cool AI versions of, and this is the concept, is the concept of Tiffany taking over a Maldivian island. The brand could do that. Why don't they do that now? It's already been proven. I've already proven that there's an appetite for that. They could now just do it and go, look, this has been inspired by a post from Grant Dudson. Thank you, Grant. Now we're going to do the rest, right? And I go, cool. I'm happy with that. A little bit of a nod in my direction. But then they create something, and then that gets what? Maybe even 1 million views or something. Maybe like 100,000 likes, because the story is interesting. They've actually gone, oh, we're going to be clever about this. We're not going to keep talking about what we think might go viral. There's a guy that's already created a concept that did. It's not real. Why don't we make it real? Because we know that the appetite's there, and we know that it would go viral. It's already proven. So I think there's lots of, brands out there that also need to start to really think about the way they approach everything. Be more agile. Be more logical about your approach. Stop being so archaic and wrapped up in red tape. And, there's a lot of people doing some great work out there. Lots of creatives that don't have the platform, but they've got amazing ideas. And they're using AI to conceive, to represent and visually articulate what those ideas look like. And if they post and suddenly it goes bonkers, why wouldn't a brand back it up? They're doing the hard work and they're not even paying for it.
Absolutely. I love that. You talked about virality, but you also talked about brands becoming or willing to expose themselves more and actually going into that the brand soul. What's behind the brand, or what is the brand when you cut it in half? What do you see? And I think you're absolutely right that yes, we've got oversubscription, we've got all this kind of tactical nonsense that we're sort of bombarded with every day by brands, and actually, you know, those guys that make those comments that, you know, this isn't what a dealership looks like, actually it probably is, and actually it needs to be, because, you know, it's that exposure, that rawness, that story that's going to actually create that connection. And you're quite right, you know, you don't buy a Ferrari because you want to die with the key in your hand. You buy it because you want to drive it and feel what that's going to be like. I mean, in your opinion, when you think about experiential design, immersive design, where do you think it's heading within the next sort of 5 years? And how do you plan? I mean, I think I don't even need to ask that bit of the question, because I think it's already very, very clear how you would plan to evolve your creative process to keep aligning with it. But where do you see it? You know, you're very good at visualizing what things could be. So where do you see sort of experiential design heading in these next few years?
So my thing, you know, let's go back to 2015 when I first walked into a Yayoi Kusama kind of immersive experience. And that was the first time immersive experiences for me really hit the spot. Like, I was like, wow. And it was the Infinity Room. And I was like, this is incredible. I'm like, this is art for me. This is not your, and I might get slayed for this, but quite frankly, I don't care. This is not your unmade bed by Tracy Emin. It's not the banana on the wall. It's not a little dot on a white canvas, which frankly, most people just do not connect with, and they just don't get. And it's dictated by a very certain, you know, a certain type of elite breed of people in the art industry that say it's great and it's cool and this is what you should be worshipping and honoring and all of that. And I fundamentally disagree with that. And so when Yayoi Kusama started creating these kind of immersive worlds, I was like, oh my God, like, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter whether you know, kind of are a member of the Tate or the Saatchi Gallery or anything like that, you get it. You get it because it makes you feel something. And that's what art's supposed to be there for. It's there to create a dialogue of feeling. You know, to sit in front of an art piece, you know, like the Mona Lisa. I mean, like, you know, whether you like the painting or not, it doesn't matter. It's more about what that says through what it is. And it's a canvas, an expression by an artist that lived so many years ago, that also went through all manner of different emotions and all of that. And that person that is so famous and iconic sat in front of the Mona Lisa and painted it, right? And whether he was going through affairs, whether his mum just died, all of that emotion, his eyes were looking at the exact same thing as our eyes are looking at. Now that's the bit that I absolutely love about real, like, kind of tactile physical art. That's when I struggle with NFTs and all the rest of it. But to look at a painting that's actually been painstakingly expressed and brought to life is fascinating. And so I love, you know, the kind of the sense of what immersive art does to the common person, the common man and woman and everything in between. Like, it's compelling. So back then, as soon as I walked into that room, I went, this is where brands need to take things. And I set up immediately something called the Immersive Art Gallery, because I knew that it would be this is back in 2015. If I had millions of pounds, I would have set the Immersive Art Gallery right there and then, and I would put all the coolest immersive art artists in the world under one roof, which now is being done left, right, and center. Super Blue in Miami and all of that. And everyone's like, it's game changing. And I'm like, yeah, I was talking about this back in 2015. But what I wanted to do is make a point. So I set up an Instagram account called Immersive Art Gallery. And that was my digital version of what it could be physically. I was given the opportunity to create a series of immersive art installations for Ford. And Ford loved my ideas, everything from a fully pitch black labyrinth. So I was like, look, immersive art is the way forward, immersive experience is the way forward. And they were like, well, we don't really understand what you mean when you say that. And I was like, right, boom, 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 here's a bunch of ideas and this is what it looks like. And they go, okay, this is really interesting. Wow, this is definitely something that we haven't explored before. And to give you context, there was one particular part of the narrative of Ford that was all about the interior design. They wanted to talk about the different materials that were used inside the car and the calf leather and the craftsmanship behind the stitching and all of that kind of stuff, which, you know, you feel when you get in. You sit, you know, in your driving seat, you're doing this up and down, you're feeling the paneling, you're doing all of that. But, you know, when you're in a new car, you're also thinking about so many other stuff, right? You're thinking about everything. And so it's multi-sensory, but it's sometimes in this case, it's like, well, if it's all about the feeling of the materials, because they were like, oh, you can just pass some materials around and we'll go, oh, that's nice. And you drink your champagne and you pretend like you're interested. Most people are not. I'm like, how do you take that same sentiment, but create an immersive experience? And I thought, well, it could be really interesting to create a labyrinth. Everyone loves the labyrinth. But what if you do that in complete darkness? So you can't see where you're going at all. And you are forced to literally feel your way around and through this labyrinth using your sense of touch. And then we put lots of material on the walls. So we canvassed the walls, and the first section was in natural materials like tree bark and grass. Next would be man-made materials, bubble wrap, acoustic foam, sticky tape. We created a collage of rubber gloves, blew them up and sprayed them with water to freak people out, right? Like, people were shrieking. They were like, oh my God, what am I going to feel next, right? So they were very sensitive to their sense of touch. They were more attuned to what it feels like to interact with a texture for the very first time. And then towards the end of this labyrinth, they were introduced to all of the different materials that they find within the car. So then they feel the calf leather and the paneling and the stitching and all of these different materials in a way they've never felt before, because they were so engaged and they were so focused on that sense of touch. And then they walked out the other side and they were like, wow, that was amazing. And then people went round again. They wanted to do it all over again to see if they've missed stuff as well, right? Did you feel this wall? No, I missed that wall. Oh my God, where was that? Oh my God. And there was something in there. I had no idea. And people had to put their phones in like a little box before they went in. So no lights or anything like that. And we even had like a kind of infrared camera or whatever to kind of take snapshots of people when they felt the rubber glove wall, because that would freak people out a bit. So they'd be like, oh my God. So we also kind of captured the energy a little bit as well through photography. And that's the kind of stuff I started to introduce to brands. And then that's just gone from strength to strength. I've done it from Johnny Walker, for Tudor, for many different brands. And so my notion back in 2015 about the future of brands being fully immersive experiences was on the money. Now you're asking me where we're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. For me, it's what I call experiential art. It's not immersive art, it's experiential art. And when I say that, I've mentioned it a little bit already, it's about making the person the protagonist. It's about putting you in a room and allowing you to explore. It's allowing you to define what that experience means to you, but through the lens of the brand. So you will come out and your message will probably be the same, but your understanding of it will be very personal to you. And it's going to be everything from Yayoi Kusama's obliteration room, which was where you go in with a series of stickers into a white room and you stick those stickers wherever you want. And that is your contribution. You leave, then, you know, other people come in and it's generative and it builds. So it goes from a white room to this incredible, vibrant kaleidoscope of color that ultimately is being designed by all the people that go in there and contribute to that. So you feel like you've got a stakehold in whatever that is, a sense of ownership. And at the moment, I'm talking to Art Basel Miami about an installation of mine called One Hit Wonder. And One Hit Wonder is a 5 meter by 5 meter white cube. Every wall is literally canvassed, and you go in one at a time or in a group, say, of 3, 4. And each person has a balloon filled with acrylic paint in a color of their choice. They attach a positive affirmation to that, a dream, an ambition. They launch it at the wall, it explodes. That's their mark that represents a particular positive sentiment that represents them. And then they leave. And then the next person comes in and does exactly the same thing. And you have what? Something like 100 people a day over, say, 30 days. So eventually you've got 3,000 marks of positivity in that space, driven by people, for the people, because it becomes an exhibition space afterwards. It's an art piece that you walk in and you explore, just like you would a painting. But it's been driven by the people. So you're asking me where everything's heading. That's where it's heading. It's going, step into my world. Here are the tools. Now express yourself. And that's empowerment. And that is how you get brand loyalty and advocacy. And that's when people feel as though they own part of your brand. And if you've got people feeling like they're subscribed to who you are, and they feel like they own a part of what you do, even if it's just metaphorically or emotionally, then you can't go wrong. And that's where I see everything heading in the next few years.
I'd love to, maybe there's some kind of frequency tool that could be put into that room to engage the general energy of positivity.
Well, it's actually, it's so interesting you said that, because I did miss that bit. Like, so underpinning it is something called emotional residue. So emotional residue is exactly what you've just said. It's the notion that we leave energy behind. So there will be an experiment. And it will be that whole, because I want to make it the most, it's a really difficult sentence, this, but the most palpably positive space or art installation on the planet, right? Like, the energy needs to be palpable. It's like you walk in, you go like, wow, I feel good. And in theory,
it would be interesting to put a EPG onto somebody and see if their natural frequency rises to something closer to sort of alpha gamma rather than being lower, because we know that frequencies operate and are attuned to different emotional states. And if you've created a cube of positivity, that then goes beyond art. You've now created therapy. You've created a space that's therapeutic. It's awesome. It's awesome. Grant, I've got one last question for you, which I sort of consider to be my kind of closing question, which is, you've got a lot of experience. It sounds like you're a person that, we've already said it, you're constantly learning, you're constantly trying, you're constantly wondering and remaining reflective about what's next. What, if you could give one piece of advice that you would offer to your creative peers rather than to sort of brands that are navigating this world? Maybe they don't have as clear understanding of it as you do, or can see the future as clearly as you can, as far as this experiential art is concerned. What piece of advice would you give them? That kind of that singular piece. What would it be?
Embrace every tool available to you whenever that is presented. So anything from AI through to new hardware, whatever technology is available. Look at a palette of tools to figure out how you can use your imagination to create new and unique experiences. Because I feel like so many creatives get scared of using new stuff. It's like a lot of creators are very much shying away from AI because they're like, oh, it's going to take our job and all of that. And my point is, and I was a little bit like that at the very beginning, but my point is, look, step up to the table and learn how it's used, try and apply it to your creative process, and figure out how you can use it to your advantage. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But do not start to criticize something you haven't tried, at least, because you just never know. It might actually change the game for them. And creative people need an outlet. and AI gives them an outlet to express themselves. And I think that's one of the most incredible gifts we've had in terms of innovation as far as I've been alive. The amount of people that say, you know, and yes, you can sketch something out, but if you can create a really cool render and then you can apply, you know, that to even a mood board or whatever it is, and it better represents a core concept that you have, and it helps you work with a visual artist as part of a brief, then surely that's worth investing a bit of time in to understand. So yeah, I mean, I think that's what I would say to my creative peers, is just try and embrace everything that is available out there in order to make them more effective creatives. I think that's really important.
I love that. And again, agree agree completely. I think that's a great piece of advice. I think so many people tend to too quick to fear and criticize things before they truly understand its capability and the very, very personal, positive contribution it can make to their own activities and to the way that they approach things and life.
Yeah,
it's awesome. Grant, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I normally try and create some kind of wrap up or some kind of view, but there's so much there, and I think people are going to really enjoy listening to your creative process, where everything stems from, everything comes from, where you see the world moving forward, and how you kind of saw this years ago, and it's just been confirmed, and it's still continuing to happen. There is no wrap up. I think you've wrapped up by offering that piece of advice to your peer group, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of your work. I'm looking forward to seeing more experiential art. And I'll be the first person to buy the physical book, which maybe it's going to be a physical book with animated digital movement inside, and I'd happily pay £100, you know?
Yeah.
Grant, thank you so much for your time. And
my pleasure. It's been an honor.
And we hope to have you back again. Thank you.
Be my privilege. Thank you.